Welcome to the Ideas on Stage podcast, your regular insight into leadership communication.
Hey James, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thrilled to be here.
Thank you for accepting our invite. Now, James, I'm super excited about this conversation because I've read your book, which I highly recommend to everybody, Investable Entrepreneur, How to Convince Investors Your Business is the One to Back. So today we are going to talk about all things pitching for investment. And although in your book, you cover many aspects. You go through the entire process if you want to be an investable entrepreneur. I would like to focus our conversation today on the pitching and communication side of things. I know I've learned reading your book that it's not the only thing, but this would be the focus of today's conversation. Fantastic. And one of the things I would like to start with this idea that you talk about in the book. You say that it's your pitch, not your idea, that eventually will determine whether or not you receive investment. And I like it very much. And I think that for some people, for most people, it may be seen as counterintuitive. It's your pitch, not your idea, that will determine whether or not you receive investment. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. So I think in the book I use the phrase great ideas don't raise investment, but great communication does. And I think we, especially if you've kind of worked in an accelerator environment as a startup and you've been in that ecosystem for a while, you can sit there and feel quite frustrated that someone who you think has an idea that's nowhere near as good as yours goes away and gets the funding, and then you're there struggling to raise the funding. And if you look at those successful fundraising stories, most of them are great ideas, but I'm sure we've all seen some ideas that have got funding and you think, how and why are they being funded? Like where's the appeal in that? And it's the founders that can communicate really well are the ones that end up with the investment, the ones that can tell the story, get investors excited by their vision, explain the sort of strategic steps they have in place to ensure the ideas are a success. And the more succinctly you can articulate that to an investor, the higher your chances of success. Because equally, not only are there's some ideas out there that you might think aren't that good and are getting funding, there's equally loads of brilliant ideas that are not getting the funding they need. And that's really what my mission is to make sure that those great ideas that aren't getting the funding because they can't get their idea out there in the right way.
I couldn't agree more, James. You can have the greatest idea in the world, but if you can't pitch it, if you can't present it, if you can't communicate it effectively, it doesn't matter.
No, absolutely. It comes down to understanding what your audience want to hear and need to hear, and communicating that succinctly.
Well, let's talk about that then, because that's a very important concept that you also talk about in the book, that in the end, when you present and when you communicate an idea, you need to understand your target audience. And I think that this is definitely one of the most important principles to consider when it comes to communication in general. So here, the target audience is an investor. In the book, you talk about the mind of an investor. So can you help us understand how the mind of an investor looks? What are they really looking for when it comes to them hearing or watching an investor pitch?
Yeah, sure. So I think the really interesting thing for me, just to sort of a pre-lead up into that, is that founders spend their whole lives up until the point of raising investment understanding absolutely everything they need to know about the mind of their target audience, being their customer, right? The people they're going to be selling their product to. What they don't do, and for good reason, you don't need to until you start thinking about raising investment, is understand the mind of the investor, which is who they're actually pitching to for the investment. So they go into these investor meetings with the sort of same kind of pitch and the same kind of narrative that they might use to go, that they've been doing for years, pitching very successfully to their audience and gaining their first few customers and whatever it may be. And then it just stops working when they go and pitch for investment, and they're kind of a bit confused as to why. And that's because they're not using the right pitch for the right target audience. And investors need to know kind of three things from a top level. The first is they need to see that you're highly resourceful, that you understand, or that you can get people to buy into your vision. Right, you're able to get people to rally around you, see the great opportunity in your idea. So basically explaining the essence of the business, getting people excited by the vision, because they know if you can do that, not only can you attract other investors around you, and you can raise capital when you need it, whether that's now or in the future, but you can also attract game-changing commercial partnerships. You can bring on board the top, the best talent who will come and work for you for a sort of below market rate in return for shares and equity, because they believe in the vision, they want to be part of the journey. So that's the first thing they're looking for, is a founder that can go and make stuff happen. They're highly resourceful. They can get people excited by their vision. That's the thing that most founders are pretty good at. And it's these other two things that founders struggle with a little bit more when it comes to pitching for investors, because the next thing they're looking for is a founder that understands the financial risks as well as the financial rewards. So again, founders could be quite good at focusing on the potential rewards. Hockey stick growth, we're going to be a unicorn by Christmas. That's easily done as a founder, but it's not so easily done to sort of sit and think about the financial risks and kind of how much investment are we going to need to get there to reach those goals? Are those goals realistic? How can we mitigate any financial risk to make this a safer bet for an investor to invest in us versus somebody else? And then the third thing that the investor's really looking for is a founder that understands the route to commercial success. So what I mean by that is kind of twofold. First, what are the stepping stones are you going to take for actually getting from where you are today to that moonshot goal of being a unicorn business or whatever it is? How are you going to take what are the long-term steps for actually getting there? And also what are the short-term steps for getting to your next strategic milestone? So you need to talk in two terms, like what are you doing in the next 12 to 18 months with the cash you get raised right now to get to your next big strategic milestone, where you may then go and raise more money. But what does it look beyond that? What's the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years entail, and what does the exit look like? And then that's the final kind of part of this, kind of showing that you have an understanding of commercial success is kind of what does that exit look like? Map it out. What's your financial vision for the company? What's the exit potential of this company? How big are we going to get? How much is the company going to be worth? What are we aiming for? So then an investor can look at it and go, I need to get this is the type of return I could get on my investment. And if you think about it, we're all quite used to, as founders and entrepreneurs, pitching a product. If you can think about equity, shares in your business as a product you're selling to investors, it starts to become a little bit easier to pitch, because that's essentially what you're doing. It's an exchange of value, just like buying any other product. You're pitching something of value, your equity, in return for something of equal and greater value, their cash. Exactly as you would if you went and bought a new house or bought a new car or bought a tin of beans down the shop. You're not going to overpay for something if you don't think the cash you part with when you buy a product is for something that you believe to be equal or greater value. You're not going to pay more for something if you don't need to. And it's exactly the same with your equity. If you treat your equity as a product and you try and package that up and sell it into something that an investor can see that they can get equal or greater value from, which is the return on their investment. So,
and I found that idea in your book very interesting, because you do say that, and you explain it, that you should approach a pitch for investors like a sales pitch. And you draw the analogy, you explain it really well. And it made me look at things also from a different perspective, which was really useful. Now, another thing one of the things you said that often entrepreneurs, founders, think about and communicate the opportunity. We will be a unicorn by Christmas, whereas the investor, in their mind, they also look at the risks, the financial side of things. So another concept that you explain in the book is that entrepreneurs and investors often speak a different language, right? Yeah. It would be great if you could speak to that, because again, that's one of the also in our experience, one of the most common challenges we see when it comes to communicating our ideas, not speaking the language, not making our communication, our presentations, our pitches relevant to that particular audience.
So essentially, investors speak the language of risk, assets, proof, implementation, and let's face it, no founder gets out of bed in the morning to do risk analysis. That's not the thing that most founders enjoy about building a business, but that's what's important to an investor. They're risking their capital on you, and they need to know that you understand the potential risks in the business. Whereas an entrepreneur, our natural language is opportunity, possibilities, ideas. That's what we love to talk about, and that's what's putting up the barrier between investors and entrepreneurs, because an investor that's inherently risk avoidant, when you talk about opportunity as a founder, all the possibilities just kind of sound scary because you're inherently risk avoidant as an investor. So marrying those things up, understanding that what you normally talk about with your team about all of the exciting opportunities, all the things that this could be in the future, actually could turn out to be a bit of a turnoff for the investor when you're pitching to them. And it's getting that balance between, yes, we've got this exciting future vision and we can have all this success, but here's the sort of sensible strategy that sits behind it, and you can trust in me to deliver it. I can be trusted with your money to make this happen. I'm not just a crazy inventor with all of these incredible ideas, which is what a lot of founders can risk coming across like when they just focus on possibilities, opportunities, and ideas.
And if we don't get that balance right, I heard you speak about what do you call it, like a zombie stare?
Zombie stare, yes. So something I talk about a lot is that zombie stare, which is like this affliction that you get when you're presenting your concept to someone, and this could be in any scenario, but in our case to an investor, and you get that blank kind of glazed over look from the audience staring back at you when they just don't have a clue what's going on, and they all just look like zombies in the audience because you've lost them in a sea of confusion and mixed messages, and just nothing seems to make sense. And you've talked maybe really excitedly about your idea, but they're none the wiser as to what it actually does and why they should invest. So you've got to avoid that zombie stare, and that's pretty much, in a nutshell, that's what we say we help people do at Robot Mascot is avoid that zombie stare.
Nice. And also, James, this is connected to what we've covered so far, but also in our work, one of the main challenges we see, and I'm pretty sure that you see the same things in your line of work with your clients, is that often when we communicate an idea, because we know so much about it, we are super passionate about it, and we are so close to it that we think that what we are communicating is simple and clear, whereas the experience from the audience's perspective is the opposite, right? It's confusing. Do you see that? Do you see the same thing with your clients?
Yeah, 100%. I often flippantly remark that the only thing that makes Robot Mascot so special is that we're not in your business and we don't know your idea, and we're just coming in and asking all the right questions to unpack what it is your idea is about and how you're going to build your business, and just asking the right leading questions and talking to you in the right way to really get a sense of everything. So then we can piece it back together in a way that we and everyone else would understand. So yeah, that the power of not being in your business, it's really difficult when you're in your business to step back and look at it from an external perspective. The Robot Mascot brand for our business is probably the hardest brand we've ever worked on, and taken us the longest to get the communication right. And in fact, we're constantly trying to improve it because it's the one that we spend our whole day in, is our business, and taking that step back and looking at it from an external perspective is really tough, which is where we add a lot of value for our clients, is just not being them and just being that external sounding board. And if they say something to us, and we repeat it back or reflect it back in kind of content for a pitch or a business plan or a set of financials, and they go, that's not at all what I meant, that's not right at all, well, we've found a communication issue, because we're just reflecting back what we thought we heard and what we thought we understood from what you said. So now we need to work through this, and we need to find a way where we actually communicate it in the right way so what you're saying is what you actually mean to say and not what you thought you meant to say.
Yeah, because if you understood a certain thing, then most likely somebody else, like an investor,
exactly. If that's how we interpreted it, and you know, a team of 4 or 5 people working on your project with us, if we all interpreted and agreed that that's the correct interpretation of this business, and it's not at all what your business is, then yeah, there's a big communication issue there that we need to resolve.
Yeah. On that note, a suggestion that you give, which I love, very effective in communication in the book, is that entrepreneurs, founders should use everyday language when communicating, avoiding jargon, acronyms. I think this is so useful. Can you speak to that as well?
Yeah, so this is another term, a bit like the zombie stare. We call it jargon jibber jabber, robot mascot. And this way you just fill your pitch and your it could be any communication across your brand, but in this case your pitch to investors with all of these terms and phrases. Some of them will be kind of technical phrases, some of them will be kind of industry based phrases, some will just be overused, like, I don't know, blue sky thinking, an ecosystem, and you know, we're building an ecosystem. It's like, who isn't? You know, tell us what it is. Like, what does that mean to you? So it's kind of a mix of using kind of acronyms and businessy speak or industry and sector specific speak that alienates the majority of investors. Like 80% of angel investors would list themselves as sector agnostic, right? So the chances are you're pitching to someone who's not a specialist in your sector, and therefore you need to make sure that it's accessible to them. So we can't be using industry speak. And if you're talking about blockchain or something complicated like that, kind of explain, you know, what some of these terms mean. Try and explain it in layman's terms if you can. But yeah, kind of avoid all of that jargon, all of those buzzwords, and just, you know, it's that classic kind of, would your 7-year-old niece understand it? Would your 90-year-old gran understand it? And if they get a sense of what your product is and what your business is, then any investor will too. There's one exception to my rule that we do use, and that's financial type acronyms and terms that any investor worth their salt should understand. So, you know, customer acquisition cost and using CAC in your pitch as the expression of that, I think would be okay. Unless you know you're pitching to retail investors or friends and family or people who don't come from you know, they wouldn't list themselves as angel investors, but they're more fans of you or fans of the industry, then perhaps you need to think twice about whether you use those phrases. But if you're pitching to a VC and you're using kind of VC terms, you would probably be okay. But it's your own industry specific terms that you need to be more concerned about.
Yeah, you're right. And this takes us back to the very first thing we talked about, which is whatever you communicate has to be relevant to that particular target audience. Yeah. So if you're right, if you are 100% sure that particular audience knows that particular terminology, then yeah, let's go ahead. We can use it. But if not, then perhaps it's not the best approach.
And I've got a great story about that in the book. At the end, I have a case study with a founder or someone who's part of a founding team that raised kind of 60 million seed round. So huge. It was the biggest up until recently. In fact, it might even still be the biggest seed round in the UK ever. And they were raising so much money. They weren't pitching to angels. They weren't even pitching to VCs. They were pitching to kind of PE firms and banks. So they cut out even all of the kind of VC type metrics. And on every single slide in the corner, they just had NIM and then a number, net interest margin. And most people don't really use that. It's not a very commonly used term when raising investment, but they knew that PE firms and banks used that term all the time, and they lived and breathed what their net interest margin was going to be. So they just stuck it on every slide in the corner and eventually got the funding they needed. But they knew exactly what their audience, the investors they were pitching to, needed to know to make a decision. So they made sure that information was in the pitch in their language.
Yeah, great example. And by all means, James, in our conversation, if you think about any other examples, stories, anecdotes, feel free to tell us. Let's also talk about assets around the pitch materials that we need to have. Now, you talk about different pitch materials that we need to create: the investor pitch, the presentation pitch, the teaser pitch, the one pager, and the expression of interest form. Whereas in my experience, what most founders think about is, okay, especially at the beginning, if they know nothing about what they need to do, okay, I need to raise investment, so I'll create an investor pitch. It's just one thing, an investor, one piece of asset. You talk about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 assets that we need to create. Now, just very top level, can you tell us the key differences between investor pitch, presentation pitch, teaser pitch, one pager, and expression of interest form?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. When founders go out to think about creating their pitch, they think about it as one document, and this is where it gets really confusing, because the next step is they'll go and Google, what should I have in my pitch? And you'll end up with loads of different articles, and you'll have some that say you need a 10-slide pitch, some that say you need a 20-slide deck. You'll have some experts say that you must lead with your vision, others say that you must lead with your team, and then people talk about one pages and expression of interest forms, and you just think, hang on, what am I creating? There's so much conflicting advice, and that's because there's not one size fits all, and there's not one type of pitch that you're going to need during a typical campaign. So what the 5 that I've listed in my book are the 5 assets I've identified as being the most common amongst founders that are successfully closing rounds. What have they ended up with at the end of the journey? And they've essentially ended up with what I'd call an investor pitch. And this is your full kind of most brochure-esque form of your pitch. It's a 15 to 20 slide pitch, 50 to 100 words on a slide. It's the type of thing you could send out to an investor via email. They could read it and they would get a sense of your business, they'd understand it, and they'd be able to invite you in for a meeting. So or you could send it after a physical presentation and as a summary of what you talked about in your presentation, but it's got context to it. You could read it without you needing to be there to explain anything. And then you have your presentation pitch, which is the version you actually present in front of, which same content, but designed and differently, because it's got a different job. So you might reduce all the content down to kind of a headline, and that's all there is on the slide. It could just be an image, or it could be 2 or 3 one-word bullet points. And the idea here is that you present in front of this, you add all the context with your own spoken word, but it gives you a bit of a guide as to remember what you're supposed to be talking about on each pitch. So I've got to cover these 3 points, and a bit of a visual aid for the people who are witnessing your presentation to follow you through the journey, that follow you through the narrative. So they're 2 very different types of pitch. If you were to send someone your presentation pitch via email, it would make no sense at all. It would just be 3 words on a slide. Like, I don't know what this means. So it only works as a presentation. Then you have your teaser pitch, and this is a 10 slide pitch, or sometimes 5-slide pitch, but somewhere between 5 to 10 slides, which is really just filling in covering the value proposition. Changes slightly depending on the stage of your development. Maybe a very early stage, this would be selling in the vision, the value proposition, what your product is, getting them excited enough that they want to then meet you in person. If it's a later stage company, you'd be focusing more on traction and validation in that teaser pitch. You would spend less time introducing the concept and more time talking about how it's being adopted at an ever increasing rate, and that everyone loves what you're doing, and you've got all these customers and all of this growth. But it's a 10-slide version of the investor pitch that focuses on those things. It doesn't go into strategic thinking, the strategy, the growth, the market, the marketing plan, all of that kind of stuff. You leave all of that stuff out, but it's just the sort of traction, validation, and the concept. And this is used to introduce yourself to an investor. So let's say we're doing a cold email outreach to an investor that you've identified as being a really key potential investor for you. They've invested in your space before. They've got a portfolio of people in your niche. It's sending out that targeted email saying, look, I see that you've invested in company X, Y, and Z. We're also doing something really exciting in the same niche. I think you'll love what we're all about. Attached is an overview of what we're currently doing at my company. I'd love the opportunity to present to you in person, or failing that, I'd love to send you our full investor deck. So it's kind of saying, this is just a quick little teaser, a little overview of what we're about. If you like it, let's talk further. So you're building that relationship with them rather than sending them the full investor pitch, which is more like a cold call. The more like saying, here's my company, here's how much money we want, will you give me some cash? It's like, hang on, who are you? I don't know who you are. Let's take things slow. So it's just that here we are, here's what we're about. If you like it, let's explore a little bit further. Then you've got the one pager, which is essentially the whole pitch reduced down onto a single page, called often referred to as an executive summary by some investors. Sometimes you need it to apply for some angel groups. Sometimes you need it to apply for some VCs. It's part of the application form. Attach your executive summary or a one pager. Sometimes angel investors will ask for it before they agree to meet you, after you've sent them that email with the teaser pitch in. Can have an expression, top level summary or a one pager, and you can send that to secure yourself the meeting. And then finally, the expression of interest form is a really cool asset that's really simple. It's like an A4 page that asks a few simple questions like, who are they? Are they interested in investing? Do they want SCIS or EIS shares if you're a UK-based founder? How much money do they think they would commit to the round if they were to be part of the round? What else can they bring to the table other than money? Can they self-certify as a high net worth individual or an angel investor? So just a few key details, but it really transforms the process, because rather than getting kind of a verbal commitment, you've got a written commitment, and psychologically the investor feels more committed to you and your opportunity than anyone else they're speaking to, because they've put something down in writing. And it also allows you to weed out the tire kickers. So those investors that want to look like they're active but currently don't have any cash to invest, but they want to keep the options open, they want to look like they're active in the space. If you present them with an expression of interest form after a good pitch, they'll suddenly be like, oh, no, that's probably not the right timing for me or whatever. And you just know you don't need to worry about following up with that investor and wasting your time on the tire kickers. So, and the final thing it does, which I really love, is let's say you're raising 500K. The idea with the expression of interest form is to get sort of 750K or more expressed in interest. And then you can ring back that list in order of preference and kind of say, look, you're my top pick investor. We're ready to close our round. We're actually oversubscribed. We've got 750K committed. We only need 500K. You're my top pick investor. I think you'd be really add value to I think we could work really well together. Are you in? If so, we need to know by the end of the week, because we're instructing our lawyers to send out the heads of terms and take the process forward. Suddenly they know that if they don't say yes now, you've got loads of other investors that you're going to be ringing next down the list. So they have to make a decision there and then. They also get a massive pat on the back to say that, actually, not only did I think this was a great opportunity, there's loads of other investors who have thought so too. So it reassures them for making that decision to actually invest in your business. So psychologically, it's a great kind of sales tool to get them to actually commit to something rather than keep saying yes, and constantly having to chase them, going, are we doing the deal or not? You can actually, make them actually take action. So yeah, simple A4 form, but completely transforms your campaign.
I love it. I can see the power of an expression of interest form, and it goes back to what you said before, that founders should treat a pitch for investors like a sales pitch, because Absolutely. If we think about it, an expression of interest form is something that we often use when we pitch to potential clients, and perhaps it's not as straightforward. Not everybody thinks about it when it comes to pitching for investors, but we can use the same kind of marketing or business sales strategies for investor campaigns.
It is a sales pitch at the end of the day. Like I said, you're selling a product, which is which is your equity, and you're having to guide that investor to make a decision on whether or not they invest in you or somebody else. Much like when selling your product, it's, do they buy my product or someone else's? You're guiding them to make the right decisions by asking the right questions and getting them to think about how your product's going to better benefit them than their competitors. So it's exactly the same process as selling anything, but because it's an intangible thing, it's shares, it's a piece of paper stored at company's house. It doesn't feel like it's a product or a sales pitch. But if you can get your mindset in that space, it completely changes the way you approach the whole process from start to finish.
Yeah. And the other key takeaway for everybody here, if we think about the different assets, the different pitch materials, the documents that we need to create, for me, one of the other key takeaways is the idea of separating things. Because also, even just beyond investor pitching, another mistake I often see, James, and I'm sure you see the same thing, that we create something. It could be, normally we use PowerPoint, and their version of PowerPoint often doesn't work for the live presentation because it includes too much text and details and people can't read a list at the same time. Because of the way it's developed, it also doesn't work really well as a handout, as a document. So we try to create just one thing that works for every situation, but it doesn't work for no situation at all. Whereas when we start separating things, like for example, slides and handouts are not the same thing and they should be separated, that makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And that's all we're saying here is that you need to have different versions of your pitch for different scenarios that you're going to find yourself in. So
depending on the context. Also, James, let's talk about the key principles of your approach. There are 6 principles of the perfect pitch. It's a step-by-step approach. Now, I would like first, let's see how much time we have, but I would like to first look at some of them in particular, because they are very much connected to the, let's say, the communication side of things. For example, principle 3 is around the structure.
Yes.
Could you explain why thinking about the structure of your pitch is so important?
So for me, this is where a pitch is won or lost, really. The structure is how we tell the story. It's not what we want to say, it's how we say it, the way with the order in which we say it, right? So we need to really think about unpacking. I kind of use a phrase, we're taking the audience on a journey of discovery. You know, we're starting with the basics. If I was to create a new university course, for example, like a course like physics, a new physics degree, I wouldn't start lesson 1, semester 1 with like a complex topic like string theory, for example, because very few people understand that as it, and certainly not people who have just joined a physics degree. So I'd start with the basics, and that might be obvious to some who have a slightly better understanding, but it might be new to others. But we get everyone on the same page within the first couple of lessons, and then we start to progressively dive deeper into the subject. And that's how I try to frame about the way you think about the structure of your pitch. And far too often founders kind of pitch from an assumption or from a basis of assumptions. They start with the idea that the audience already knows a little bit about, they sent the teaser pitch, right, to get the email. So we don't need to talk about this, that, and the other because they already know that. People need to hear things a number of times, and not everyone in that meeting would have necessarily seen the teaser pitch that you sent out to secure the meeting in the first place. So you need to start with the assumption that the audience knows nothing and build upon their knowledge slide by slide, building upon that knowledge as you go. And I talk when it comes to structure, really about having 5 acts. There's 5 acts to a pitch, and it actually follows a tried and tested approach in playwriting and film writing and not writing novels, and a lot of plays are written in 5 acts. Like Shakespeare was a massive fan, and nearly all of his works are in 5 acts. It was actually created centuries ago by the ancient Greeks, who were the first sort of people to create plays in 5 acts. So it's a really common way of chunking up content, and the one that the brain is quite used to understanding because we've been doing it for centuries, and most things that we consume are in kind of 5 acts. So you can kind of think about your pitch in those terms. So you have kind of the hook at the beginning, the first act, that kind of, why am I excited by this? Why should I listen? Why should I stick around? So your vision, your elevator pitch, the things that are going to grab the attention, some key metrics or something exciting that's, I've got 1 million users on my platform already. Like, wow, okay, I need, this is worth listening to. Then you've got the essence, which is essentially the value proposition. Like, what is the product? Who's it for? What problem is it solving? What opportunity is out there for this business? Who are the customers that I serve? Then you have the evidence is the third act. And this is where we really start to delve into, right, we've got a great concept. I've explained that in the hook and the essence, but this is where I need to prove now to an investor that it's not just me who thinks it's a great idea. Actually, the wider market does too. You know, there's customers out there who use this and or have said they would use this, and here's what they had to say. Here's all the research and the validation, the evidence. There's industry experts that are backing me on this, that have said this is a great idea. You know, any evidence that you can provide that this is a solution that's worth investing in and is going to have a future. Then you have the plan, is the fourth act. So you start talking about the plan that you're going to implement, the more strategic information. What's the sort of that short and long-term strategy I spoke about earlier? What's the position in the market? What marketing? What's your development roadmap? How are you going to, you know, what are the stepping stones you're going to take to get there? And then finally, the ask is the fifth act, which is I'm going to ask for the money. I'm going to explain the financial projections as a result of getting this money. And here's the deal that I want doing, and a call to action. Like, what do I want the investor to do next following this pitch? So you have these 5 acts, and you can say as much or as little as you like in each of these 5 acts. And it could be 20 slides, it could be 5 slides, it can be anything you like, 1 slide for each act. But as long as you cover in a pitch those 5 things, you end up with a really great narrative, a really great structure to your story, the one that resonates. And it works because the first 2, the hook and the essence, is all about creating an emotional connection. It's like speaking to the heart, and gets everyone emotionally connected with the concept you're trying to share. Then the final 2 acts, the plan and the ask, creating a logical connection with the audience. It's all the strategic information. How much money could I make? What's my return on investment? How are we actually going to get from A to B? All the strategic information that creates a connection with the head, speaks to the head. So you're speaking to the head and the heart. And then the one in the middle there, the evidence, is essentially the climax of the story. And it's the thing that kind of glues the 2 together. And it transitions from this emotional state where we're like, this is a great concept, into a logical state by using evidence, proof, logic to prove that emotional feeling of this is a great idea is the correct response to the pitch that you're experiencing. Because not only do you think it's a great idea, and the people who you're pitching to are now thinking, wow, this is a great idea, but here's all the industry experts, here's all the evidence I have from my surveys and customer groups that they think this is a great idea too. So suddenly you're going, oh, it's okay, it's not just me, loads of other people do too. So I feel safe in this assumption that this is a cracking idea. So you're transitioning out of an emotional state by using logic and then setting yourself up for the strategic part of the pitch. So it's making sure you have that emotional and logical connection as you develop your structure for your pitch.
And I think that's one of the key takeaways for our listeners today. In addition to, of course, creating that journey, as you said, the narrative with the going through the 5 acts, but it's so useful to create the right, when we think about developing a content, having the right mix of logic and emotion. And I don't know if this is what you also see, James, but with our audience, with our clients, we often see the tendency of being too much towards, or too often towards, the logic with facts and figures, which of course are really, really important, but it's not the only thing. If you want to make something memorable, they need to remember it, they need to understand it. Then we need to include emotion as well. Yeah. Stories, examples, anecdotes, analogies. Do you see, just out of curiosity, do you see the same thing by any chance?
Yeah, we see a bit of a mix with the work that we do. So there's, typically speaking, there's 2 types of founders. There's and it kind of goes back to the idea of having a left side, right side dominance to your brain. And you've got those that are more creative, perhaps the sales and the marketing type founders that come from a sales and marketing background, or the visionary type, the sort of entrepreneurial, classic kind of entrepreneurial character of I've had this brilliant idea, I've got absolutely no idea how to make it. There's people out there who can do that, but I've just got this incredible idea. So they're the sorts of people who are great at the emotional side. And then they struggle with the strategic and logical information of kind of how it's actually going to come to pass. How am I going to turn this into reality? So we spend a lot of our time helping them with that part of their pitch. And then you've got the technical founder who has had an idea, is able to build it, has built this incredible product, but isn't necessarily able to get themselves out of that mindset of kind of, this is what it is and this is what I'm building, and they get drawn into, look how amazing this is, look at all of the features and the code and the detail behind this, and forgets to kind of talk about the bigger picture, the vision, and so then we spend a lot of the time on that sort of connecting with the heart and getting that emotional story across. So it's kind of tends to be one or the other, and you're kind of trying to pull them out of their comfort zone into the bit that's missing from their pitch. Because I think we all have a tendency, for example, I'm much more logical in the way that I work, and my co-founder is the creative. He's the comes from a creative director background. He's worked at top 10 advertising agencies. He's the one who, when I say there's this problem, he goes, we'll call that the zombie stare. We'll call that jargon jibber jabber. He's the one who comes up with those cool phrases I used earlier. And I'm the person who might use the data to identify that that's an issue. And it works really well as a co-founding team. But when you're a founder and perhaps you're a sole founder or you're two technical founders or something like that, sometimes you miss that other side of it. And that's where someone like us and yourselves come in with
And I can see also a Robo Mascot, very good combination with you and your co-founder. And also, James, if we stay with this principle, so let's talk about, again, let's stay within content development structure. One of the things that you recommend, that you suggest, is to not necessarily look for templates. As you said before, somebody tell you need to have 10 slides or 20 slides, or you need to start with the problem, or you need to start with the team, as you said earlier. And you say that doing that, looking for templates and then building from that, is not necessarily the best approach if you really want to look at things with a bit of creativity as well. It would be great if you could speak to that.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I see them as a bit of a hindrance because they pigeonhole you into a box, and a box that may not fit what you're trying to say. So with these 5 acts that I talked about, excuse me, sorry, these 5 acts, they're more of a loose structure. Like I said, they could be 1 or 5 slides or 10 slides in each of the acts. It gives you the opportunity to talk about what's most relevant and most important about your business that you want to get across to an investor, that you believe they will find important, without being stuck in various kind of pigeonholed categories that you might find on a templated blog post that says you must have these slides in this order. I don't think a natural pitch doesn't work like that. So yeah, it gives you the freedom to kind of think about what's most relevant for your particular business, because the reality is very few, certainly from my experience and the clients that we work with, very few founders have like a perfect kind of blank canvas to work from. And there's always something different, something unique about their story that needs to be intertwined into this message, and it needs to have a flexibility and a freedom to do that, and to do that properly. So yeah, they're good as a starting point, but they do hinder. They make creativity harder.
Yeah, when it comes to creativity and the flexibility you mentioned, John Cleese says that we don't know where we get our ideas from, but what we do know is that we don't get them from our laptops. And we could say we don't get them from templates either.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It gives you a bit more freedom to express your message, I think.
Yeah. Right. So principle 5, clarity. Now, a couple of things I found in your book, which are, I'm sure, really useful to our listeners today. One, we talked about a little bit, the external perspective, and it's a practical thing you do at Robo Mascot. You say that often what you do is somebody in the team develops the content, for example, of the presentation, and then you make sure that somebody else from your team looks at the same thing, and he or she checks things from a clarity perspective.
Yeah.
Can you tell us why you do that? Because I think that's the principle behind this is so powerful.
Yeah. So the reason we do that is because there's a risk when our team, so when we write a pitch, we tend to have two different people, two different team members working on the product, and one of them is a business strategist, so they're looking at the strategic part of the pitch I talked about, the plan and the ask primarily, and then we have a copywriter that comes from a kind of creative copywriting advertising background who works on the hook and the essence part, and so we've got two people working on this pitch, and their job is to get their head into your business as much as possible so they can then write the content and do a good job with the pitch and explain the business in the best possible way. Now, in the act of doing that and getting their heads into your business as much as possible, they potentially end up in exactly the same position you're in, which is having your head in the business and completely blindsided as to what writes, what's wrong, what lands and what doesn't land. So we then always have that third member of the team, and that will either be someone like myself, one of the financial strategists who might come from an investment analyst background and has kind of seen hundreds of pitch decks and decided who gets investment and who doesn't. But someone else from the team will look at that from with fresh eyes, having never seen the content before, and kind of, pass judgment on would this pass? Would this excite an investor? Does it tell me everything I need to know? Is there anything that's still confusing about this? And then providing that all is good, it goes to the client and it's signed off and they go and pitch it and get investment. But yeah, it's to stop us falling into exactly the same trap we're trying to solve, and with what we talked about earlier, and kind of being able to get yourself out of your business to see how everyone else sees the world, and sees what you say. So
it's very easy to fall into the trap of communicating in a confusing way unless we find a way to get access to some sort of a fresh or external perspective. Yeah, you're right. And another thing that you suggest in the clarity principle is that once as a founder, let's say that you've developed your pitch, maybe you've developed part of it, let's say that you've developed the content, then you suggest that you take a break for could be for a couple of days, and then you go back to it, which I found interesting because it's something that we do as well at Ideas on Stage. For our listeners, could you speak to that? Why do you recommend that?
Almost for the same reason as before, that again, your head is in the content. You think you've absolutely nailed it. You've come up with this amazing sentence that pretty much sums up your whole business, and you're so happy with it. And then you go away and you come back a few days later and you look at it and you think, oh God, that's crap. That doesn't sound very good at all. And again, it allows you to give a fresh perspective, because you've gone away thinking it's great, and you come back and you read it with fresh eyes, and things have happened and other stuff has happened in your life, and you're like, actually, that's not as good as I remember it to be. That still needs some work. The other reason is actually creatively, subconsciously, stuff's happening in the back of your head. So you've been working really hard. Maybe you've been sitting in front of the screen for 4 hours, 6 hours, kind of trying to craft this pitch content, and you think you've got there, or you've got some areas that you were struggling with, but you think they're good enough. You take a step away, you go and watch something on Netflix, and there's just something there goes, that's a cool way. Or you see an advert or hear something on the radio, and suddenly it's like, I could do that. And you don't really know where it comes from. Sometimes you wake up in the middle of the night and you scribble something down. It something will just come to you, and it's because it's kind of all processing in your subconscious, and suddenly you think, that's a nice way of saying this, and that's what I'm trying to say. I'll use that word is a great way, and you've heard it somewhere else, and you suddenly make that connection. So yeah, creativity can't be rushed. At the same point in time, you want to raise money, and you need to get out there quickly, and you need to close the deal. So you can't take forever, but you do want to kind of give yourself a little bit of breathing space.
Yeah, it's so true. For example, James, one of the first things we do when we work with our clients, say that they need to prepare a presentation. It doesn't have to be an investor pitch. It could be a TED talk or a sales presentation. We start by, first analyzing the audience. That's the most important thing. Then we brainstorm. We do a brainstorming session so that we can come up with lots of interesting ideas that maybe down the line we can include in the content of the presentation. But exactly as you say, then what we do is we create the output, that product of the brainstorming session. We send it to the client, but then we say also for us internally, but for the client, let's not have a look at this. Let's not do it today. Perhaps let's wait tomorrow as well. And then in a couple of days, let's go back to it. And you're right. Normally in a couple of days, things happen, fresh ideas, new ideas, and then we can connect the dots.
Yeah,
very powerful.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really is. Really is.
Okay, so principle 6, design.
Yeah.
Now, this is an interesting one because on the one hand, design is and can be very powerful, and we'll talk about that, why that's the case. But if I think about your step-by-step approach, and I agree with it 100%, but I think for some people it can be counterintuitive because it's only the last step of the process, whereas so many founders, business owners, presenters in general, when they need to give a presentation, and in this case, it could be an investor pitch, the first thing they think about is, okay, I need to design, I need to create some slides. Whereas it is part of the 6 principles, but it's only one of them. Isn't that the case?
Yes. Yeah. And it's very deliberately one of them, and it's very deliberately at the end, because what I tend to find that happens is a founder will go, I need to create a pitch. And the first thing they'll do is they'll open up PowerPoint, they'll have a blank slide in front of them, and they'll go, now what? And they'll start just trying to put some content in. And because they haven't thought about the structure, because they haven't thought about the content they're going to share, because they haven't gone through that clarity step we talked about, they haven't done all their pre-work, the couple of the first 2 principles we haven't talked about today being for raising investment, being the business plan and the financial projections. If you haven't got all of that stuff in place first, you're going to end up with a pitch that doesn't communicate very well. And this is all about communication, not looking pretty. It's about communicating. So ideally you get a really great communication that looks powerful, and you can use design, which I'm sure we'll talk about in loads of different ways to make that happen. But if you had the choice between the 2, if you had a really good looking deck, but with really poor communication, or you had a crap looking deck with really good communication, the one that would raise the investment is the one with the great text, the one with the great content that communicate. It might look a bit shoddy and it doesn't give the best first impression, but out of the 2, the one that actually explains the concept in an articulate way that gets people excited by what you're trying to build is the one that's going to raise the investment. So we've got to get the communication right. When you start with design, when you start with a blank PowerPoint file, or you've downloaded a PowerPoint template, you're starting to think visually about what you want to say, and you're kind of going, oh, well, this design template has 3 bullet points here and a headline, so I need to come up with a headline and 3 bullet points. But that might not be what you want to say. You might need a different structure on that slide to communicate what you want to say. So it's best to start with text. If something, we do everything in Word, the content is in Word, and if your pitch communicates really powerfully and you think you're getting yourself excited by the content that you're sharing, and it's getting you excited with 12-point Arial black and white text in a Word document, and you're going, this sounds epic, this sounds like a really cracking business. Imagine what it would be when it's then beautifully designed and looks fantastic. Whereas you can't really save a good design when it's got bad copy in it. Design isn't good enough to save the crap content. So you've got to start with the good content and then visualize it afterwards, I find.
I'm glad, James, that you see this way with your background, because I agree with you 100%. In the end, if we don't have a message, a story that resonates with your particular audience, it doesn't matter how beautiful your slides are. It doesn't matter, even from a delivery perspective, how strong you are with your body language and eye contact and gestures. These are all things that can be very, very useful and powerful to amplify your message, but the content, the message comes first. I agree. But let's talk about then the power of design, because I also agree that yes, we have great content, but then if you get it right from a visual perspective, you can use a visual aid that supports, reinforces, and amplifies the power of your message. Can you speak to the power of design?
Yeah, I mean, it's super powerful, and the reason it's so powerful is because as a species, we've been communicating visually longer than we've been able to communicate verbally or through words. So if you think about it, kind of Paleolithic cavemen would be etching images on the side of cave walls. Before we, you think about cave paintings, but prior to that, they were kind of carvings, etchings into cave walls. And research scientists have kind of looked at these paintings over time, and they've recently discovered that these early humans weren't just communicating what they saw. We've gone hunting and here's a woolly mammoth and here's a person with a spear, but they're actually communicating thoughts and ideas and kind of more intangible things. So we're actually able to communicate ideas, these kind of intangible things, long before thousands, hundreds of thousands of years before we were actually able to talk, by kind of etching them out onto cave walls. So as our brain is kind of hardwired to communicate visually. That's why the first kind of written languages were pictographic. It's why when we see an image, we communicate, we can process that in our brain I think it's 4,000 or 40,000 times quicker than text. I can't remember the exact figure off the top of my head, but it makes sense, because if you think about kind of flicking through social media, and an image can just sort of scroll past your screen in seconds, and you'd be able to go, yeah, that was so and so, and he was wearing this, and he was in this scenario, like on the beach or with his family, and you could just scroll through it, and that's, you'd be able to almost instantly recall some of the key details. But think about the amount of text you'd have to read and digest to get that same amount of detail and repeat that same amount of detail back. So it's very, when you think about it, it's very obvious that we communicate visually. We're better at understanding visual communication to written communication. So that's why it adds such a powerful layer to your written text and your verbal presentation, because an image, as they say, paints 1,000 words, and that seems a cliche, but when you explain it in the context of human evolution, it kind of becomes clear as to why that may be the case.
Makes sense. Yeah. James, we've got a few other minutes. I've got maybe a couple of other questions for you. Before we close, I love reading books. So this is a question for me, really, not for, it would be useful for our audience as well. Now, in addition to Investable Entrepreneur, which I recommend for everybody, how to convince investors your business is the one to back. If you think about what we've talked about today, so it could be related to investor pitching, or it could be more broadly, maybe communication, presenting, pitching. Is there one book, and it could be a book, it could be an article, it could be a podcast, whatever it is. If it's a book, even better for me, because I love reading. Anything in particular that you would recommend that we should check out?
Well, I'm going to use this opportunity to do a cheeky plug for my business partner's podcast, which is called the Art and Communication Podcast. And he talks to leading experts around brand and communication around this very topic. So I'm going to do a little cheeky plug there. So that's Nicholas Ruston and the Art and Communication Podcast. In terms of books around communication, I'm trying to think more of, I guess I'm more focused on ones that are about business and about development. And so there's one called the Startup Evolution Curve, which is a really great kind of guide on building a startup. Oversubscribed by Daniel Priestley is a great book for it, kind of a hybrid between marketing strategy and communication. How do you get kind of fans that want to do business with you, have them lining up to do business with you? So that's a hybrid between using communication skills and sales strategy alongside kind of marketing techniques to kind of get this incredible audience behind you. So they're probably two of the most influential books on me.
And oversubscribed is very much connected to your idea of the expression of interest form and what that does.
Yeah, he's got a great case study in that book, actually, of how that's been used, and expression of interest form has been used in an investment sense. So yeah. Yeah, very closely aligned. Daniel's actually a shareholder of Robot Mascot, so that probably explains why it's so closely aligned.
Okay, right. So James, if anybody wants to connect with you, what should they do? Where do they find you?
Yeah, it's probably the best place is to connect with me on LinkedIn. So just search James Church. I think it's /James C Church, but yeah, just search James Church. Look for my headshot. That's probably where I'm most active. But I share content every day on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I've got a Facebook group if you're on Facebook called Investable Entrepreneur, so you can join that group, and I share daily insights into raising investment. So they're probably the best places to connect with me. And if any of your listeners are thinking about raising investment over the next within the next 6 to 12 months or at some point in the future, well worth going to pitchready.co.uk, which is a link to an online quiz we've created that allow you to kind of benchmark your ability to raise investment across these kind of key things that we talked about today. So yeah, if you want to kind of know how you stack up against everyone else, how ready you are to raise investment across the key themes we talked about today, just go on there. It's like a less than 5-minute quiz, and you'll get a kind of full bespoke report with your answers and advice on how to improve those assets, and a free copy of my book as well. You can order a free copy of my book once you've taken that quiz as well. So yeah, well worth doing if you are thinking of raising investment.
Amazing. So for everybody, check it out. And James, what's the most important thing? So we talked about many things today around all things pitching for investment, communication, simplify your message, content, structure, narrative, logic, emotion, design, so many things. What's the one thing you would like our listeners to take away from today's conversation? It could be anything. It could be just an idea, a reflection, something that you thought about as you were giving your answers. What's the one thing they should take home today?
I think it's right where we started. The great ideas don't raise investment, great communication does. And focus as much on how you communicate your idea as you are building it and executing on it. And if you can do that, you'll be absolutely fine.
It's the pitch, the way you communicate your idea, not just your idea, that will determine whether or not you'll receive investment. So let's end with that. James, thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you for sharing all your experience, insights with us, and all the very best.
Yeah,
and
you're
let's
very
keep in
welcome.
touch.
Thank you. Cheers.
If you enjoyed this episode of the Ideas on Stage podcast, there are many more you might like, so please subscribe, leave us a review, and tell us what you think. You can find many more ideas on business communication at ideasonstage.com or by searching for Ideas on Stage on iTunes, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening, and goodbye for now.